In ancient times, when the gods still walked among men and the elements dominated the destiny of the world, there was a powerful emperor named Yandi. He was a wise and just ruler, revered by his people and respected by the spirits of nature. In his vast kingdom of golden mountains and mighty rivers, his greatest wealth was not his power or his divine lineage, but his daughter Nuwa. Nuwa was a free-spirited young woman, different from the other children of the gods. While others were learning about governance and war strategies, she preferred to run through fields, climb mountains, and dip her hands in crystalline rivers. His greatest fascination, however, was the sea. Since she was little, she would sit on the cliffs and watch the waves crash against the rocks, listening to the murmur of the waters as if they were telling her secrets. The sea called to her with an irresistible attraction. Its immensity, its mystery, its constant movement filled her with an inexplicable sensation. But he also knew the warnings. His father and the elders of the kingdom told him that the sea was a dangerous place, an indomitable domain that never showed mercy to mortals. The years passed, but his longing for the sea did not diminish. On the contrary, it grew with each sunset that he saw reflected in its waters. The feeling that something else was waiting for her in the depths grew stronger with each wave that washed ashore, until one day, unable to resist the temptation any longer, he made a decision that would change his destiny forever. It was a serene afternoon, with a sky tinted gold and the air charged with the aroma of salt water. Nuwa, with her heart beating, with excitement and nervousness, approached a small wooden raft that the fisherman left on the shore. He looked towards the cliffs where he used to sit and, without further thought, pushed the boat into the water. At first, the journey was peaceful. The sea welcomed her calmly, with small waves gently swaying as the wind played with her hair. Nuwa smiled, amazed by the feeling of absolute freedom. The world seemed to have stopped in that moment. Just her and the infinite ocean. But the balance of the sea was deceptive. Without warning, the sky began to darken. The clouds rose heavy and dense, covering the sun with a menacing shadow. The wind that was once a caress became a ferocious howl. The waves grew, lifting the raft as if it were an insignificant toy. The waters that had welcomed her gently now showed their true face. The small boat shook violently. Nuwa tried to row back, but every effort was useless. The waves dragged her mercilessly, further and further from the coast. The roar of the sea drowned out any other sound. The rain began to fall in thick sheets, and the wind roared as if 1,000 spirits they will scream at the same time. The young woman struggled to hold her ground, clinging to the edges of the raft, but the force of the storm was too great. Then, a gigantic wave rose before her. A mountain of water, furious and unstoppable, advanced with the ferocity of a dragon. In an instant, he hit her with enormous force and threw her into the sea. The cold water immediately enveloped her. She sank, feeling how the currents carried her in all directions. She tried to swim to the surface, but the storm kept her prisoner. The weight of the sea oppressed her, stealing her breath. His body spun in the darkness, unable to distinguish the sky from the ocean floor. The forces they abandoned. His vision was becoming blurry. For a moment, in the immensity of the sea, he thought he saw shadows moving around him, as if ancient creatures were watching him. They will observe from the depths. But before he could understand what he saw, his consciousness faded away. The waters claimed her, and her mortal life came to an end. But his story was just beginning. Darkness enveloped her. The roar of the sea faded, and a deep silence surrounded her. There was no pain, no fear, no time, just a feeling of infinite emptiness. His body was no longer responding, his lungs were not filling with air, and his heart had stopped beating. All that had been dissolved into the vastness of the ocean. But death was not the end of him. Something inside her clung to existence, a fire that was not extinguished in the depths of the sea. His spirit did not disappear with the waves. It did not dissolve in the immensity of the salt water. There was a faint heartbeat, a spark of consciousness that refused to die. Then, in the middle of the blackness, a flash emerged. A soft warmth ran through his being, as if a new strength was being born within him. It wasn't the feeling of his old body. It wasn't the human skin he once had, but something different, lighter, more ethereal, but also stronger. It was as if his soul had taken on a new form, a new purpose. When his eyes opened again, the world around him had changed. He no longer felt the weight of his arms, nor the beating of his heart as before. She looked at her reflection on the surface of the water and discovered that she was no longer Nuva, the emperor's daughter. His mortal body had disappeared, but in its place, something new had emerged. Now it was a small bird with red and black feathers, bright eyes, and a firm presence. His form was different, but his spirit was still intact. He had been reborn. The wind supported her, raising it above the waves. His wings beat strongly, and for the first time, he felt the freedom to fly. There were no chains. There were no limits. Only the open sky and his determination burning like an unquenchable fire. But with this new existence also came an inescapable truth. She could not forget. She couldn't ignore what had happened, nor the fate that had brought her to this point. The sea had once claimed her. He had taken her away without mercy. He had devoured his life without remorse. And now, in response to that injustice, his heart burned with unwavering purpose. I would not allow the sea to continue taking lives. He would not let its waters continue to spread unchecked, consuming the unsuspecting and defying the will of gods and humans. Without hesitation, he flew towards the coast. On the beach, among the golden sand and the remains of shells brought by the tide, he found a small stone. He held it with his beak and, with effort, carried it back to the sea. He flew over the surface and, with a firm flap of his wings, dropped the stone into the waters. Then he returned to shore and took another one, and another one. The sea had defeated her once, but she would not allow it again. Day after day, without rest, he repeated the same cycle. He took stones, transported them, and dropped them over the ocean. It didn't matter how many waves in Arastra back. It didn't matter if his effort seemed insignificant compared to the immensity of the water. He wouldn't give up. The birds of the sky watched her in amazement. Why did he insist on such an impossible task? Some birds tried to dissuade her, telling him that the sea was eternal and that no being, no matter how brave, could fill it with stones. But Jingwei wasn't listening. The humans on the coast saw her and talked about her story. Some admired her, inspired by her determination. Others laughed, believing it was a useless effort. They said that no matter how much time passes, they will never fill the ocean. But Jingwei was not seeking recognition or glory. His mission was not to convince others, but to fulfill his purpose. Even the gods from the heavens watched her carefully. Some felt compassion, others admiration. But the ocean, vast and powerful, felt nothing. It continued to roar, indifferent to their efforts. The ocean, with its infinite immensity and its eternal waves, mocked her with each attack against the coast. He didn't care about his efforts. He didn't care about his fight. To the sea, he was insignificant, a mere creature trying to challenge something that had existed since the beginning of time. But Jingwei was not seeking the sea's approval. I didn't expect the ocean will change. What mattered was his own conviction. The sun was rising and she was flying. The moon was shining and she continued her work. Neither the wind, nor the rain, nor exhaustion could stop her. The waves could drag the stones to the bottom, but she continued. The years passed and Jingwei did not stop. The seasons changed. The winds brought new scents and the mountains they wore over time. But Jingwei was still there, tireless, carrying stone after stone. Trees grew and died. Rivers changed their course. Empires were born and fell. But Jingwei continued. It never stopped. He never hesitated. It didn't matter if its body was small, if its wings were fragile, or if its beak couldn't carry more than one stone at a time. His spirit was stronger than any wave, firmer than any mountain. Because although the sea was immense, its determination was even greater. And so, day after day, the little bird continued its work, without rest, without fear, without ever giving up. Time passed without stopping, but for Jingwei, the days and nights were nothing more than an infinite repetition of his mission. From dawn to dusk, he flew tirelessly, collecting stones and branches, carrying them to the vast ocean and releasing them with determination. Day after day, week after week, year after year, the little bird continued to fight against the immensity of the sea. The seasons, they changed around him. In spring, the air was filled with flowers and sweet aromas. In summer, the sun burned brightly and the rivers flowed strongly. Autumn painted the mountains with golden and reddish colors, while winter covered the land with silent snow. But none of these transformations affected Jingwei's determination. No matter the cold, the heat, or the storm, his task did not pause. The inhabitants of nearby villages began to notice his constant presence. Fishermen passing by in their boats saw her flying over the waves, carrying stones that seemed insignificant compared to the immensity of the sea. Some watched her with respect, admiring her persistence, while others laughed at her apparent madness. For them, trying to fill the ocean with stones was an absurd act, a task doomed to failure. However, Jingwei's story spread everywhere. Soon, travelers and merchants they mentioned in their stories. The elders used her as an example to teach children about the importance of perseverance. In the temples and palaces, poets and scholars they spoke of the small bird that challenged the ocean, interpreting its story as a symbol of the unbreakable will of the human spirit. But the sea remained indifferent. Its waters continued to extend to the horizon, immense and powerful, as if Jingwei's work had no effect. The waves, with their eternal swing, devoured the stones that she threw, hiding them in its depths. It was as if the ocean wanted to remind him that he could never defeat it, that his efforts were in vain. One day, the sky suddenly darkened and a fierce wind began to blow from the mountains. A storm like no other was brewing. The trees bowed under the force of the gale. The waves grew excessively and lightning illuminated the sky with blinding flashes. The rain fell violently, forming rivers in the land and hitting the surface of the ocean with fury. Despite the storm, Jingwei did not stop. Your little silhouette trimmed the sky darkened, defying the wrath of the elements. He flapped with all his might, fighting against the wind and the rain, until he found a rock larger than the previous ones. With great effort, he grabbed it with his beak and took flight, advancing through the storm. The sea, as if feeling challenged, responded with a monstrous wave, higher than any Jingwei had seen before. The mass of water rose like a mountain, ready to swallow it again. Claim it as I had done it in the past. But Jingwei did not back down. He knew the ocean was immense. He knew his task seemed impossible. But that didn't matter. With fierce determination, he flapped his wings and threw the stone with all his might. The rock broke through the curtain of rain and fell into the sea just before the gigantic wave broke with a deafening roar. The ocean roared. The wind howled. But Jingwei remained firm. When the storm passed and the sun began to emerge from the clouds, the ocean was still there, vast and unmovable. However, Jingwei was also still there, his mission unchanged. The storm had not stopped her, nor the mockery of men, nor the indifference of the sea. Time continued its course, and with it came new tests. Years turned into decades, decades into centuries, but the little bird never gave up its work. Empires rose and fell. Cities grew and disappeared. Mountains eroded and rivers changed their course. However, Jingwei never changed. For the sailors who sailed those waters, his figure became a symbol of tenacity, a reminder that, no matter the adversity, there was always a reason to keep going. For the villagers, his story became a teaching about will and unwavering effort. To poets and thinkers, Jingwei represented the spirit of those who never give up, no matter how impossible their mission seems. Jingwei's story was not just that of a bird fighting the ocean. It was the story of all those who, despite obstacles, refused to give up. those who defy destiny, those who persist even when all seems lost, those who believe in their purpose and follow it to the end. The ocean never relented, never showed mercy, but neither did Jingwei. And so, his mission continued, without end, without surrender, no matter how many centuries passed or how many mocked his effort. Because for her, victory was not in filling the sea, but in never giving up. Time moved forward like an endless river, dragging with it the eras and their stories. As kingdoms rose and fell, as civilizations flourished and faded, Jingwei continued his incessant work. It didn't matter how many generations passed, how many monarchs ruled, or how many empires would disappear under the weight of time. His determination was unwavering. Day after day, night after night, his small body crossed the skies carrying stones and branches, throwing them relentless upon the ocean that had once claimed her. With each rock he threw, he reaffirmed his promise. He would never allow the sea to take another life as it had taken his own. It didn't matter that the ocean seemed infinite or that his task was endless. Jingwei did not know discouragement. He did not hesitate or hesitate. Her heart was filled with a single truth. She must continue. She must brave the vastness of the waters. She must fulfill her oath. The wise men of past generations began to reflect on their history. For some, Jingwei was a symbol of resilience, an example of the ability to defy the impossible. For others, their struggle represented the futility of human efforts in the face of the immensity of the world. Could a single bird really change the fate of the ocean? Wasn't his endeavor an act of madness? Poets began to write about her in immortal verses. Painters captured his figure on canvas and scrolls, portraying his eternal battle against the sea. Philosophers discussed its history in temples and academies, analyzing its meaning and seeking answers in its determination. His story became a metaphor for the fight against adversity, a reminder that, even if the world was immense and merciless, the spirit of those who persist is never quenched. But the sea, indifferent, continued with its eternal dance. The tides rose and fell, storms lashed the coasts, and winds raged on the darkest nights. As the years passed, new storms devastated entire villages, reminding them of their indomitable power. Some waves rose like mountains and devoured homes, separated families, and reduced to rubble what humans had built with so much effort. But even in those moments of hopelessness, when all seemed lost, Jingwei's echo resonated in the hearts of the survivors. Generations passed, and people began to tell their story to children, not as a cautionary tale, but as an inspiration. In the fields, farmers spoke of Jingwei when they faced droughts and crop failures, remembering that hard work and perseverance were the key to success. In the coastal towns, sailors asked him for protection before setting sail, hoping that his spirit would help them, will guide safe through the treacherous waters. However, Jingwei never sought to be revered. He did not long for altars or prayers. I didn't want the will consider a deity, nor that they offered him tribute. He just wanted to fill the sea, keep his promise, make sure the ocean will pay your debt. And although he knew that his task was immense, he did not allow himself to doubt. One day, a wise old man, known for his knowledge of the mysteries of the world, traveled to the coast where Jingwei threw his stones. There, he watched her in silence for days, amazed for his perseverance. Finally, he closed his eyes and reflected. Is your mission an act of madness or a test of strength? Some believed their efforts were useless, but the wise man understood something deeper. Jingwei was not fighting to change the ocean. She fought to change herself, to show that not even the immensity of the sea could break her will. The sage was so impressed by her determination that he returned to his village and began telling the story of Jingwei to anyone who would listen. His story traveled from mouth to mouth, growing with each telling. Soon, travelers took their story to distant lands, to the most remote corners of the kingdom. Artisans began to carve small wooden figures representing Jingwei, and these became amulets of perseverance. Wearing one of these figures was said to protect against hopelessness. and give strength to those facing impossible challenges. Over time, some warriors began to paint its symbol on their shields, seeing it as a reminder that they should never give up in battle. But while his story spread, Jingwei continued relentlessly. His small body flew through the sky, collecting stones and branches, dropping them into the ocean one after another. It didn't matter that the sea continued devouring them. It didn't matter that the waves in Arastra back to its depths. Every time a stone fell, it didn't just resonate in the water. It resonated in the hearts of those who heard his story and found in it the inspiration to keep going, no matter how impossible their path seemed. The ocean, with its unfathomable immensity, seemed immutable. But in the hearts of those who remembered, Jingwei had already triumphed. Their battle was not just against the sea, but against the idea that some challenges were too great to face, and in that fight, she would never lose. Thus, the little bird continued its mission, defying eternity, defying destiny, defying even the logic of the world. No matter how many times the waves they will swallow their stones, as long as his spirit continued to fly, his fight would never end. The passage of time, like a current that sweeps away everything in its path, moved forward. But Jingwei's story continued to be a shining beacon of courage and determination. As dynasties passed and civilizations changed, the figure of Jingwei remained a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of the most insurmountable adversity, the human spirit could transcend the limits of what seemed possible. With each passing year, people of all ages and backgrounds began to see Jingwei as more than just a legend. His story became a legacy that was woven into the collective memory of the people. The wise old men, those who had heard the legend since their childhood, now told it as a timeless lesson. From generation to generation, the figure of Jingwei was forged as a lighthouse that guided those who found themselves in the midst of personal storms or in the constant struggle to achieve their dreams. At first, their story was told in small circles, in villages or in homes where wisdom was passed on by word of mouth. Peasants, artisans, and warriors all found something profound in their history. A warrior preparing for battle, for example, could see himself reflected in the small bird that, despite being insignificant in the face of the vast ocean, never stopped fighting. And like Jingwei, the warrior faced a fight that seemed unattainable. But, like Jingwei, he could not give up because his honor was at stake. The peasants, like the warriors, also they found a reflection of their own lives in Jingwei's story. Work in the fields was not always easy. Crops did not always arrive as expected, and the seasons often did not. They cooperated. In those times of drought or flood, the peasants remembered Jingwei and his dedication. Through their story, they learned that there was no task too small or too big to be faced, no matter how many failures or adversities occurred. The important thing was to continue without giving up. The story of Jingwei also reached poets and artists. They began to represent their struggle in their works, seeking to capture the essence of their bravery in verses, paintings, and sculptures. Over the centuries, artists of all disciplines they tried capture his figure on canvas and paper. Paintings of Jingwei flying through stormy skies, her small body covered in foam and salt as she threw stones into the sea, became powerful symbols of perseverance. The sculptures, sometimes delicate and other times robust, showed the bird in its eternal flight. The wise men, for their part, reflected for years on the true meaning of their sacrifice. Was Jingwei a figure of madness, as some claimed, dedicated to an impossible task, or did he represent the purest form of wisdom? Philosophers debated whether their struggle meant that human life was destined to face endless challenges, some of which had no solution. However, others interpreted his story as a reminder that not all fights are won, but all fights have value. Facing the challenge was what really mattered. Although the answers were inconclusive, one thing became clear. Jingwei's story no longer belonged just to the past, but to the present and the future. His legacy continued alive. In all cultures and regions of China, the story of Jingwei began to be used not only as a myth, but as a life lesson. Philosophers, poets, Warriors and peasants all found in it inspiration for their own challenges. Even in times of peace, Jingwei was remembered. Emperors, when making difficult decisions or when facing the most daunting problems, were said to turn to their history as a point of reference. Leaders, like Jingwei, had to make decisions that seemed insurmountable. But the real challenge was to remain firm in their principles, like the bird that never stopped flying. And so, as generations passed, Jingwei's name remained etched in history. Temples were erected in their honor, and those who visited them were said to come away renewed, with new strength to face their own challenges. Villagers also built statues of Jingwei, not as a goddess, but as a reminder of human bravery in the face of the impossible. These symbols represented the inner strength of each individual, capable of overcoming the greatest obstacles with perseverance and determination. And, of course, the ocean was still there, eternal, covering the earth with its vastness. But as long as Jingwei flew, as long as her story lived on, she would never cease to be a beacon of hope to all who battle the seas of life. The story of Jingwei was not just the story of a bird. It was the story of humanity itself, a story that said that, even if the fight was endless, there was always value in persisting. As the centuries passed, Jingwei became an icon of resistance, a symbol that inspired those who felt defeated, and those who, like her, knew that although the battle was endless, there was no better victory than to keep fighting. It was not necessary to defeat the sea. The important thing was to never give up. Jingwei's legacy was not material victory, but the eternal legacy of courage, determination, and resilience. She left us a clear message. No matter how big the challenge, no matter how small the effort seems, there is always value in moving forward, and its story will endure as long as there are human beings willing to fight, to persist, and never give up. With Jingwei's story, the ocean will never be just water again. He will become the witness of the eternal struggle, in a space where the perseverance of a single being can alter the course of events. And so, Jingwei, the tireless bird, will continue to fly, always, leaving behind his legacy of struggle and hope. In our next video, we will explore another fascinating story from the vast world of Chinese legends. Guan Yu, the god of war, a figure of loyalty and bravery. Join us to learn about his history and how his figure transcended Chinese culture. Don't miss it.